Next up in our retrospective Final Fantasy look, we have the black sheep of the series, Final Fantasy II. And let's just rip the band-aid off right away. You know why, I know why. The leveling system is weird. We'll get to that in a little bit. Final Fantasy II was actually one of the two mainline Final Fantasies that I'd never played before starting the series alongside Final Fantasy II. Wait a second. So I wasn't actually entirely sure what to expect. Now, there are a whole bunch of different releases for this game, all meaningfully different from each other, but for reasons which I'm sure will become apparent, I wasn't willing to play through every single version to understand every single possible experience that someone could have with this game. I ended up deciding on playing both the Pixel Remaster, as I figured it'd be the version I and probably most other people would enjoy the most, and the NES version to get a feel for how it was originally played. Two more disclaimers. Number one, I didn't actually finish the NES version, and I'll get into why that is before too long. Judge away if you wish, but I did make sure I gave it a solid attempt. And two, similarly to Final Fantasy I, I did not exist yet in 1988, so I don't have any first-hand experience with how this game was received as it released. Nor am I Japanese. We actually never got the game until 2003 over here. Actually, now that I think about it, I did have a friend who got the GBA Dawn of Souls release, and he enjoyed it, so I guess 100% of the people I knew that played it as a kid enjoyed it when it got released in English. Starting off with the narrative once again, with Final Fantasy I, I noted how its story, characters, and world building were all either very minimalistic or just straight up non-existent, and that it was by far the weakest part of the game. Thankfully, Final Fantasy II made significant improvements in this regard. In FF1, I mentioned how exploration felt more Metroidvania-like than anything, but in FF2, I always felt like I had a clear goal in mind. I wasn't just bumbling around with whatever new exploration method I had unlocked until I found something to do with it. I was directly being told, oh, this cave has mithril in it which we need in order to create weapons to fight the Empire with. If I did go off wandering, it was more out of curiosity or trying to find the exact location of something I'd already been told about, rather than simply looking for something to do. It's still not a super in-depth story, especially compared to what we'd expect from more modern games, and the characters themselves don't really have much or any development, but it has more than 3 major story beats, and so it's a considerable step up from FF1. The story the game does tell is fairly dark. A quick summary is that the Emperor of Palamecia, Matthias, but he's not actually properly named in FF2, has summoned monsters from hell and begun conquering the world. His army captures a bunch of cities, including Fynn, kicking out Princess Hilda and forcing her and the Wild Rose rebels to go into hiding in Altair. The main characters, Firion, Guy, Maria, and Maria's brother Leon, are all defeated when their hometown is attacked, and all of them, save for Leon, are saved by the rebels and brought back to Altair. Thus begins a quest to aid Hilda in retaking Fynn and searching for Leon. They gather mithril to help develop weapons to combat the Empire, destroy the ultimate airship, the Dreadnought, incubate the final Wyvern egg, rescue Hilda, who has been taken captive by the Empire, retake Fynn, search for the Crystal Rod to open up Mysidia Tower, obtain Ultima from Mysidia Tower, defeat the Emperor and the Cyclone, confront Leon, who's assumed the role of the new Emperor in Palamecia Castle, and are interrupted by Matthias, who has conquered his way out of Hell and returned for more, navigate the Jade Passage to Pandemonium, teleport out of Pandemonium because they were menuing too quickly and clicked the wrong spell instead of life. I swear that's a canon event, not user error. And then finally defeat the Emperor once and for all in Pandemonium. Technically, there's a bit more story in Soul of Rebirth, but I never played any versions with that included. And unlike FF1, that quick summary doesn't basically cover every single story beat in the game this time. There's plenty else happening in the meantime. Plenty of friends that we make, plenty of friends that we lose. And I'd need a much longer section if I wanted to actually fully detail everything that happens and why. And while I said the characters didn't have very much development, honestly, the fact that they even existed and had personalities in the first place, rather than being signposts that occasionally got updated when you completed a dungeon, really helped to make the story feel a lot more impactful. Sure, a good handful of town NPCs still basically served this same function, but there were also a good handful of characters who did react to the new state of the world. The boy in Diced is a good example, with how distressed he is over the state of the Wyvern. And the main characters actually form relationships with other characters, which makes their deaths feel that much more impactful when it's someone who is maybe in the party for a bit, or someone that we've relied on for narrative purposes and provides us with extra motivation to keep up our fight against the Emperor. Exploration in this game plays out quite differently than the first game. Instead of the world gradually opening up as you unlock more and more traversal mechanics, it's actually quite open from very early on once you get the canoe. There are a few locations that you need the boat to reach, and then a few more dungeons that only open up as the story progresses, but everything else is fair game. The way the game tries to keep you in check is by abruptly placing stronger enemies nearby and having that serve as the barrier to accessing some later game areas, but with frequent world map saves, you can eventually brute force your way to Mysidia early and get access to significantly higher level weapons and some more unique spells. And the dungeons themselves have also made significant improvements in terms of layouts. Now, I know, there's a 9x5 tile sized elephant in the room, I'll get to that in a moment, but in terms of general layouts, I found FF2's dungeons to be a significant improvement. The biggest change is that each individual map is smaller, with a lot more doors and stairwells leading to new rooms rather than trying to force everything into one. This helps the main areas to not feel quite as big and clunky, and allows the rooms to be built on their own scale, allowing the areas to just work a little bit more cleanly. And this applies to the town areas as well. Compare Castle Saronia to the Wild Rose Hideout. The former has everything included on one map, which made all these skinny-ass hallways which got blocked by NPCs, and the latter has 4 rooms in addition to the main one, but they're not confined to the same map, allowing for a cleaner layout. And the main room actually feels like its own space rather than just a liminal space linking everything together. Individual dungeon maps being smaller allows for more intricate layouts to be designed without getting the gigantic sprawl that was FF1 dungeons. But I did say there was an elephant to address, or 2 of them, I suppose. The first is this door, or rather the 47,000 doors exactly like it. They shove you in the middle of a room with a supremely jacked up encounter rate, making it pretty likely that you'll deal with a fight or 2 in each of these rooms. They start off fine, but the sheer volume of them just makes them incredibly tiring. And if I wasn't playing the Pixel Remaster with the faster battles or ability to turn off encounters, then I'd probably have just ignored all of the doors unless I absolutely had to in order to proceed. But thankfully the Pixel Remaster features kept them tolerable, allowing me to continue to be the loot goblin that I am. And this point ties in perfectly with the other elephant, the sheer volume of encounters in this game. There were simply too many encounters for my liking. And while the increased speed of the Pixel Remaster made them much less frustrating to deal with, they were ultimately the reason that I couldn't finish the NES version. I just grew disinterested in how slow the overall progress was when I was constantly dealing with encounters that all required notable amounts of thinking, and I'll get more into that later on. And even in the Pixel Remaster, I was tired enough of the encounters that I had to tap out and turn them off in Pandemonium. And while we're talking about elephants, I suppose it's time now. The leveling system is weird. On paper, it makes sense. To get better at swords, you use swords. To get better at magic, you use magic. It's how real life works. If you want to get better at something, then practicing that thing is the main way to improve. And it's far from the only game that had individualized skills like this, but FF2 has caught a lot of flack for these systems. The general leveling system where you get a set amount of experience points from enemies is completely missing here, and instead you have a random chance to gain XP in certain stats based on what happened in combat. If you lose HP, then your HP goes up. If you use magic, then your intellect or spirit can increase. Attacking with your weapon increases weapon proficiency and strength. And again, this sounds cool on paper, but in execution it just feels a bit clunky. It's a huge dopamine hit when you do see that weapon or spell level up, but they're fairly infrequent, and the formula for determining XP has an RNG factor, so if you're terminally unlucky, then unless you really drag out every encounter, then it can be quite a while between level ups. And when you get a new spell, maybe something that's typically incredibly powerful, like Holy, Flare, Ultima, it just kinda sucks. Now, in all honesty, offensive magic just in general isn't great unless you're hitting an elemental weakness, but it's still always a cool playstyle to mess around with. Usually, getting a new spell or summon or materia or whatever, it's a hype moment where you now suddenly have access to this cool, powerful new spell, but despite Holy Flare and Ultima usually being powerful endgame spells, they start off at about the same strength that Fire did 15 minutes into the game. And for Ultima, you actually have to grind out all of your other spells as well in order to have it be, well, realistically still not that useful. And with how much stronger physical attacks are at dealing with single targets, and Teleport, which is found in a chest in the first dungeon, is much better at clearing out random encounters, then the rest of the spells just don't feel worth the effort. And while we're talking about spells, let's dive a bit further into magic. Offensive magic is pretty powerful right off the bat for the first couple dungeons, and then falls off considerably as you progress, which is unfortunate, but not really particularly out of place for earlier Final Fantasies. And then we have the utility magic. I can't speak to every spell, as I just couldn't be bothered to level up every single buff, especially as boss fights were not the challenging part of the Pixel remaster, but some of the more essential spells like Esuna and Bosana encourage some weird gameplay in order to properly utilize. Also, who gave Bosana the audacity to even exist as a separate spell from Esuna? These spells remove more and more status ailments as they level up, and so if you want to be prepared against some of the more dangerous status ailments, you need to spam them on healthy characters to level them up. I've been told that if you know what you're doing, then it's not a particularly grindy game, but for a blind playthrough, it can really feel that way when you don't know what's good, and you level offensive spells without realizing how impotent they are, and then learn about Teleport or Warp for dealing with normal encounters, and now you have to level them up in order for them to be useful. And especially in the NES version, spells level up quite slowly, and we'll get back to the level curve in a bit. I want you to think of any other RPG that uses a similar progression system where you gain experience in individual stats or skills, and think of one thing that they all likely have in common with each other, but not with FF2. You most likely thought of a Bethesda game, and the fact that those games only have one character to worry about. Only having one character to worry about means that you don't have to hold back with the stronger characters to ensure that everyone gets adequate experience. Now, obviously the systems of FF2 are nowhere near as complicated as Skyrim. There's less variety of stuff to level up, and the process of leveling them up is simpler. But say you want to have 2 characters capable of using Esuna, then you need to spam it all over again, repeating what you've already done on a brand new character. And if one character does get overleveled compared to the others, then it actually disincentivizes you from using them in fights because they'll just end the fight too quickly and nobody will get much, if any, experience. In Skyrim, as you only have one character to worry about, you don't have to worry about other party members stealing XP from each other. You come across an enemy, you do everything necessary to kill them and get XP accordingly. I don't know, maybe a dragon or something can swoop in for a kill steal, but by and large, you will get all the available XP for whatever it is you're doing. But in FF2, if you're not constantly going out of your way to focus on leveling, then it's really easy to stagnate. And one of the play patterns this encourages is to equip weaker weapons and beat up your own party members for a bit. Now, in reality, it's not actually as bad as I might have just made it seem. I certainly wouldn't say that I hated it, but there were numerous frustrations that all deserved to be addressed. Both versions of the game that I played did have a way to cheese the leveling process if the grinding was that big of an issue for you, so you could just get it all done at once and then just cruise through the rest of the game. The NES version has a glitch where you can select a target and then cancel it immediately after and repeat ad nauseum. You'd still get credit for the cancelled attack, whether it be a weapon attack or a spell, and so you could get a ton of XP towards your chosen stat relatively quickly, or at least as quickly as the NES menus would allow for. I do wish I realized I could rearrange my spell list before I got this footage, though. Obviously, glitches are going to be controversial to some, but play the way you want. Whether you're swapping weapon types or just power leveling a new spell so that it's not useless, it's also a way to quickly get back up to speed in the middle of the game. And then the Pixel Remaster has the auto battle system. You can't get quite as much done in one combat as the NES Select Cancel glitch, but faster level ups and faster encounters still make this pretty quick. I found that the moose enemies in Tropical Island had a very high physical defense, so I could just turn on auto battle and let my characters wail on it for 0 damage most hits, and quickly stack up a lot of actions, giving you a ton of XP while you've gone to the bathroom or something. Warp and teleport are usually going to miss at low levels, so I could just auto battle with those casting and get a ton of casts out before the battle ended. I tried to boot up a run of Slay the Spire 2 while I was doing this, but that game must take controller inputs while it's in the background because I kept tabbing back in to find myself on a different screen. Oh well. After beating the game, I was talking to one of my friends about it, and he did tell me a bit about how HP and MP level ups work. They just check the difference between your HP and MP at the start of the fight versus at the end of it, and so if you healed up during the fight, then you'll miss out on your HP level ups. But because this is how it works, you can also just use swap on a low-level enemy right outside Altair, losing a ton of HP and MP and then raising those stats every single fight. The game's re-releases did also significantly ease the leveling curve from the NES version. Rather than each level needing 100 experience to level up, the first level up only needs 20, gradually scaling up to 100 for level 16. And starting with Dawn of Souls, characters will automatically get an HP up every 10 encounters. In terms of gameplay outside the leveling though, it's a moderate improvement over the first game. Each of the 3 main characters are effectively a blank slate that you can mold into whatever you want them to be, and you can pivot and have them learn something else if you find some cool weapons or want to try out magic. Anyone being able to learn magic means that you can plan to have backup supporting characters if necessary. Furion was a solid secondary damage dealer, but Guy's damage was just so much higher that I gave Furion Berserk to buff up Guy for the boss fights. Overall, the decision-making is still relatively simple, but it's still a pretty big step up from FF1. Or at least it's relatively simple until you look at the original version, because the later releases add one significant quality of life feature. Okay, more than one, but one that's relevant to this discussion, and that is auto-retargeting. In the NES version, if you have 2 characters target the same enemy and the first one kills it, then your second character will still attempt to attack that target. But since it no longer exists, they'll just attack the empty space while contemplating the life choices that led to them launching a full-on assault on this empty void while their friends are all out having fun going to town on the surrounding monsters, and they just really wanted to join in on the fun, but they were slightly too slow and all their glory got stolen by Guy who just one-shotted that monster and now they look stupid. Wait, what was I talking about? And yes, I'm aware that it was this way in the first game too, it's just a more relevant discussion point to this game. The game is longer than FF1, has a similarly high encounter rate, and the individual actions matter for level ups. In FF1, anyone who survived the encounter got the same XP regardless, so you just wanted to end the fight as quickly as possible. And while that's still usually the case in FF2, sometimes you might want to focus on one character for a bit to ensure that they manage to keep up with the rest of the party. I know I said in terms of gameplay outside the leveling, and then immediately brought it back to leveling, but all the design choices were made with leveling in mind, so it's hard to completely ignore it. The positives to not having auto-retarget are that the random encounters require more thought, but the negatives are that it makes random encounters require more thought. I just brought up the encounter rate and the fact that this game is longer than FF1, so you have very little downtime to relax and turn your brain off for a moment. You never reach a point where you can autopilot through encounters even once you've figured them out, because each turn has to be carefully planned to ensure that you kill everything in the minimum amount of turns. At first, it wasn't so bad when I was experiencing the combat system for the first time, or finding new enemies in a new dungeon and figuring out how to efficiently deal with them, but when I'm backtracking on the world map, or I'm in my 50th encounter of the dungeon as I get near the boss, or even exiting the dungeon afterwards if I can't teleport out of it, then it just gets mentally exhausting going through the motions each and every time. It reminds me of my biggest issue with Xenosaga 2. The break system was interesting, but because random encounters were designed with it in mind, it grew incredibly tiring following the same pattern of passing to build up stocks, boosting the right characters to hit the correct break combos, and repeating for each enemy. When you've done it enough, it loses its luster and you just wish there was an easier way to do things at that point. If I had the freedom to remaster the game but keep the lack of auto-retargeting in, I think the single biggest change I would make would just be to slash the encounter rate. Overall, I preferred my time in the Pixel Remaster over the NES version. Auto-battle, auto-retargeting, and the ability to disable encounters when I just wasn't getting anything from them smoothed over the pacing issues that I had, and auto-battle was also just a much nicer method of leveling spells like Warp, Teleport, Esuna, or Basuna up to a usable level. The fourth party member was a bit of an odd experience, with your final slot being a rotating cast depending on where you are in the game. The frequent cycling of the fourth character made it difficult to justify investing into them, as only Layla and maybe Ricard really spent a significant amount of time with the party, and as a result most of them just kind of feel like dead weight. I guess Minwoo is quite powerful relative to you when he joins you, but that's very early on. Maybe the fourth member could toss a high potion or Phoenix down or something, but their HP was probably significantly lower than everyone else's anyways, and so they'd be the one who needed the healing to begin with. And Leon, sorry ladies, not Kennedy, joined so far behind everyone else and for such a small segment of the game, and Mateus was just trivialized with Bloodsword anyways, I really expected too much from the Emperor, that investing into Leon just felt completely worthless. Maybe for versions with super bosses, I don't know. Or actually maybe he's more balanced in the NES version where level ups are slower. Actually, that's probably the case, I imagine. And now I have a few more things to mention that I wasn't sure exactly where to fit in. Sleep and Confuse are kind of half-baked mechanics at this point in the franchise. Apparently they functioned identically in FF1, but I don't actually remember ever being inflicted with them in that game. In future games, being hit with a physical attack would cure either of these statuses, but in FF1 and 2 it doesn't do this, and you instead have a random chance to recover at the end of each turn. Certain enemy formations had fights that would just regularly drag out, even in the Pixel Remaster, because enemies like Devil's Bloom or Deathflower could inflict these statuses with normal attacks. And I don't know if this next point is an emulation issue or what, but when entering combat or a menu in the NES version, my character's direction wasn't saved, and leaving combat I'd always be facing the same direction, down if I was on a field map or right on the world map. Not necessarily the worst thing, but a minor frustration that caused me to accidentally backtrack a few times and get some extra encounters. The password system was another interesting mechanic. Certain important NPCs have a separate dialogue menu where you can ask them about terms you know, learn new terms from them, or use an item on them. Like the leveling system, nothing quite like it is found in any future games, and I kind of understand why. It was a neat idea that just felt a bit clunky in execution. Whenever someone had a term in brackets or written in a different color, you could select Learn to learn it, and then ask them or other NPCs about that term to learn either how to progress or new secrets about the world or something. The biggest thing it did was just make dialogue with these NPCs a bit clunky. I'm not sure exactly how to best phrase it, but it felt like there should have also just been a regular talk option. Not offensively bad or anything, but just a bit of an awkward mechanic to use. Much like how future games took a lot from FF1, FF2 also introduced a bunch of staples to the franchise, with the biggest additions it made being Cid and Chocobos. I know some releases of FF1 have a Cid, but he was retroactively added to the game, and the first FF Cid was in 2. Going forward, every mainline and possibly spin-off, every spin-off I've played at least, had a usually important character named Cid. And Chocobos either make an appearance as a rideable critter, summon, or infrequently enemy in just about every game going forwards. And while FF1 only had a handful of enemies that really felt like series staples, and this could very easily just be me being blind, maybe there were more than I'm thinking of, FF2 introduced a lot more enemies that were more familiar to me. This game marked the first appearance of enemies like King Behemoth, Bomb, Coral, Iron Giant, Malboro, Gigantode, Adamantus, Lamia. And once again, let's close things out by talking about the music. Honestly, outside of the battle themes, this is probably one of the weaker entries in the franchise. One unfortunate thing about the early soundtracks is the song loops are all incredibly short, and the overall variety of music is pretty low. Excluding the unused songs that appear in the soundtrack, the NES OST has a total runtime of just under 22 minutes across 23 songs. Now, not every game has to live up to the incredible bar set by Claire Obscure's soundtrack with 9 hours across 154 songs, but for a 20-plus hour game, this soundtrack gets stale fairly quickly. Only 2 songs actually break the 2-minute mark, with both of them being one-time only songs played during the final boss fight and the ending scenes. There are 4 additional unused songs in the NES soundtrack, including a third battle theme which I actually quite like, and a second dungeon theme which perhaps we'll come back to that one soon. I did want to mention one thing about the soundtracks though, and that's that despite generally liking the newer arrangements over the originals, I actually found myself developing more of an association with the NES music. If I listen to the NES and Pixel Remaster soundtracks side by side, I'm going to prefer the Pixel Remaster versions, but the trend of modern soundtracks going all orchestral made most of the songs just kind of blend together in my mind when I heard them all back to back. I didn't notice this quite as much with the first game, probably since I'm more familiar with those songs in general, and so I was able to instantly recognize most of them. But outside of the battle themes, I'd never really heard much FF2 music before. The simpler structures of the originals kept a stronger focus on the melody and made them much more distinguishable from each other as background music. A good comparison might be the earlier Zelda soundtracks to Breath of the Wild. I think the Breath of the Wild soundtrack is pretty great if I ever listen to any of its songs, but only one single song really stood out from everything that was happening. And yes, it's that one. And that kind of sums up my feeling with the Pixel Remaster soundtrack. No strong attachment to the unfamiliar melodies, but most tracks ended up feeling pretty similar to each other, and only Pandemonium Fortress with the choir really stood out from the rest of them. If I had to pick out highlights from the OST, I'd have to include all of the battle music, the Rebel Army, Magician's Tower, and of course, Pandemonium Fortress. So, my closing thoughts on FF2. It's a weird game. Is it my favorite Final Fantasy? Not even close. Is it my least favorite Final Fantasy? Probably. I certainly had some fun with it, and the worst FF is still at least decent in my books, but even if it's the worst to me, I can still respect that it tried out something weird. FF1, while more enjoyable as I was playing it, isn't a particularly memorable game for me, and FF2 really made its mark in my brain for better and worse. It's up to you whether you think it's a good thing or not, but I at least felt that its uniqueness bought it a few points. I felt that maybe the game was a bit too long for its systems it was trying to implement. Similar to the first game, the gameplay loop didn't significantly evolve over the course of the game, and so the repetition started to get at me after a while, especially on the NES version. I did like a lot of the improvements, such as the dungeon and building layouts, and the stronger focus on storytelling, but the more drawn-out encounters and huge encounter rate really hurt the pacing for me. But that's just me, and I suppose a few other people. The game does have this reputation, after all.
But there's one unequivocal truth to the whole game. Final Fantasy II is not good.
But I know there's at least a few of you out there who really love this game, so for you guys, the game's already out. My opinion can't take it away from you. Would I recommend this game? Probably not. If I had to, I would recommend the Pixel Remaster, as it offers the most in terms of smoothing out the frequently criticized gameplay. And for the few NES version diehards out there, you probably already know that that's your favorite version and don't need me to tell you to play this game or which version to play.